Cennétig, from the Irish Ó Cinnéide, is an old name, a very old name. But nothing in Ireland, except maybe the land itself, is as old as Newgrange. This ancient tomb was over 3,000 years old at the birth of Christ. So for over 5,000 years, it saw the arrivals of the varied peoples that came to our shores, and sadly too it witnessed the departure of millions of Irish men and women who left us and today are scattered all over the world.
So let us go then, you and I, on an Irish journey, an hour's journey only, but endless in the imagination. A journey right through this beautiful country of ours, along the coasts and into the very lands and territories of your own Irish ancestors.
These are the majestic cliffs of Mahon. They stand defiant, holding back the relentless waves. Below, the broad Atlantic stretches all the way 3,000 miles beyond to the New World. When you stand on these cliffs, you stand on the edge of Ireland, you stand on the edge of Europe. Inland from here lies the fair land of Erainn, Ireland, the home of your ancestors.
This is the story of your great Kennedy heritage. We will trace your name from its earliest Celtic origins, following its journey across the green and varied landscape of Ireland, charting the changing fortunes of your royal and noble family. Through ancient castles and aging ruins, we will rediscover the stories of the Kennedys, from their days as mighty chieftains, as noble landowners, and as courageous rebels. We will discover, too, how your name has changed over the centuries, and how your ancestors carried it and its traditions with them across the seas to the new worlds. As we hear these stories, we will discover the spirit, the essence of the Kennedy heritage, a spirit of courage, independence, and resolve, which has seen the name survive for nearly 1,000 years. Irish surnames, which began 1,000 years ago, developed in a number of ways. If a family took their father's name, they became known as Mac, like McCarthy, because Mac means the son of. But if they were called after a more remote ancestor, they used the O, which means descended from, as in, say, O'Brien. Meanwhile, the Normans often used Fitz instead of O or Mac, as in Fitzgerald, son of Gerald. Or you could be called after the job you did, as in Smith, or the place you came from, as in Welsh, from Wales. For the 60 million people throughout the world who share an Irish ancestry, St. Patrick's Day is a time for them to come together to celebrate and rejoice in their Irish identity. Although your own family may have left these shores and settled in new lands, it is still possible to trace your ancestors back to their original homelands. Tom Lindert, one of Ireland's leading authorities on genealogy, has some useful advice.
Well, it's very important that if someone's interested in doing your genealogy, that you get all your background information in your home country first. Don't just try to jump straight over to Ireland. The first thing is that you get a person that you know the most about from Ireland, be it an ancestor, their name, a date to put them in history, be it a birth date, marriage date, or death date, and then a locality, narrow that down as much as possible, be it a county or a townland. But make sure you have the information together to begin with, and then make the next step over to do research in Ireland.
Once you have located an ancestor and have some idea of where they originally came from in Ireland, the records which will allow you to trace your family history are, by and large, available to you. The first place to go to is the National Archives at the Four Courts in Dublin. Documents kept here, such as Griffith's land valuations of the 19th century and the Tithe Allotment books, are invaluable in the search for your ancestors. Let us take the case of a namesake of yours to illustrate exactly how documents can help you find your forefathers. Let's look, for example, at the case of Martin Kennedy. We know that Martin left Ireland in the 1880s and sailed for America. We are uncertain whether he married in America or not. We also know that the name Kennedy at that time was found throughout Ireland. The largest concentrations were in the counties of Tipperary and Waterford, with large numbers also found in Galway. At the forecourts, we searched Griffith's valuations and found Martin's family in Lecarrow, Killaneen Parish, County Galway. Once we had located Martin in Killaneen, we found in nearby Athenry Roman Catholic Church that Martin was baptized on the 11th of February, 1860, the son of John Kennedy and Margaret Healy of Lecarrow. With this knowledge, it is possible to trace the history of Martin's family. So you see, all you need is the basic details about an ancestor, and the quest for information on your family roots can begin. The search for your ancestors is becoming easier all the time, thanks to a recent initiative called the Irish Genealogical Project. This is the Clare Heritage Centre in Corofin. The centre is at the very heart of a new and exciting development. The official surviving records relating to family history and genealogy are being collected throughout the county. They're being brought here and then put on computer. But Corofin's not alone in this. Many other heritage centres have opened up all over Ireland, so that no matter where your family comes from, you should now be able to get an accurate record of your family history. It is possible to trace your ancestors even further back beyond your immediate family, but let's start at the beginning and take a look at the history, the culture, and the country which shaped your forefathers. On the Erainn Islands off the west coast of Ireland stands the prehistoric fort of Donncuan, enigmatic, poised over the ocean, its ancient builders a mystery even to this day. Over 7,000 years had passed since the first settlers arrived in Ireland. Hunting in the young forests, they slowly ventured up the river valleys, building their dwellings from rough wood and animal hide, and forming small communities hidden in the forest. 2,500 years before Christ, they had developed a society that was stable enough and wealthy enough to produce these majestic dolmens. This dolmen here is the Paulna Brone dolmen, situated in North Clare in the Burren country, just another part of the wonderment that is ancient Ireland. They built mysterious circles of standing stones. These people we call the Firbolg, or the Fomorians, and the Tuatha De Danann, the legendary children of Dana, goddess of magic. Perhaps these early peoples were among your forebears, people who would have known the names of those who lie under the great dolmens. But older than Paulna Brone, older even than the pyramids, is the passage grave at Newgrange in County Meath. Built over 5,000 years ago and designed so that on the winter solstice each year, at the moment of sunrise, a shaft of sunlight penetrates to the very heart of the mound, illuminating the intricate spirals carved in stone. Newgrange was where they paid tribute to their now forgotten gods. These people were superb craftsmen in stone, but a new material was sweeping across Europe from Asia Minor. The Iron Age came to Ireland, and the people who introduced the new material around 500 BC were the Celts, who for almost 2,000 years ruled Ireland as kings. The Celts were a major influence on the course of Irish history and instrumental in shaping our unique Irish identity. Let's listen to what leading archaeologist Barry Raftery of University College Dublin has to say about the Celts.
In the narrowest sense, the term Celtic refers to a language, but it is entirely appropriate to use the term in a broad cultural context. Now, the earliest reference to the term Celt was made by the Greeks about the 6th century BC. They just referred to a specific cultural grouping in Europe as Keltoi. We do not, of course, know whether the Celts themselves used that phrase to describe themselves. Now, in archaeological terms, the Celtic culture begins about 700 BC in Europe, continues until it was destroyed by the Romans around about the birth of Christ. And archaeologists have divided this culture into two broad phases, named after two major find spots in Europe: an earlier phase, which is called the Hallstatt culture, and a later phase, which is called the Lorcáin culture. It is the Lorcáin Celts who are best exemplified in the archaeological record. There are very serious problems of archaeological interpretation. But what we can say is that the earliest indications of contact with the Celtic culture abroad appears in Ireland round about 600 BC, when there are some indications of a Hallstatt presence in the country. We have some Hallstatt material, but it's not very substantial. Round about 300 BC, there's a greater body of archaeological material in the country, which we can certainly equate with the Celtic groups. In many ways, it displays native Irish idiosyncrasies which set it apart from the material in the Lorcáin areas outside the country. We have a vast body of Celtic literature surviving in the country. We have the epic cycle, the Ulster cycle, we have the Fíneachta, we have a whole range of mythology, we have a superb collection of early Irish nature poetry and other poetry, but probably the principal legacy of the Celts, the most enduring, is our Celtic personality. We certainly have a distinctive personality, a warmth, a friendliness. The classical commentators describe the belligerent character of the Celts. Perhaps we have inherited that too, to a certain extent. But we certainly have a distinctive Celtic personality which sets us apart from all other European cultures.
A small island on the edge of Europe, the island of your ancestors was divided up between a number of major Celtic clans. In the south, in what is now Munster, were the Oinacht and the Dalcassians. In Connacht, to the west, were the Ibrin. In the province of Leinster were the Chinslig, and to the north, in Ulster, were the Nael. These clans were in time joined by the great Viking and Norman families. It was from the great warrior tribe of the Dalcassians that the Cennétig name came.
This is a place of great interest to the O'Cennétig clan, Redwood Castle, because there were some castles like these dotted all over northern Tipperary that your ancestors ruled their lands of Tipperary. You see, they were the Lords of Ormond, and here was the very heart and centre of their power for nearly 500 years. This is the real O'Cennétig country.
Tipperary is steeped in history and rich in scenic variety, sometimes mysterious, always welcoming. Tipperary is Cennétig country. The story of the Cennétig name starts in the swirling dawn of the early centuries with a mighty warrior named Cinnéide, the father of Brian Boru, the most famous of the High Kings of Ireland. In honour of the memory of Brian's father Cinnéide, Mahon, Brian's nephew, took the name Cinnéide, and so became known as Mahon ó Cinnéide, meaning Mahon, the descendant of Cinnéide. Some scholars say that Cinnéide means ugly head, others the helmeted one. Presumably Mahon believed the latter to be the case. At first, Cinnéide's territory was around Killaloe in County Clare, but in the 11th and early 12th century they were driven eastwards by the O'Briens. They settled in Upper and Lower Ormond, which is now County Tipperary, where they would reign for half a millennium. The mark of their kingship can be seen even today. Place names which embody the Kennedy name give some indication of the family's location. The place where the Kennedy name first arose was Killaloe, County Clare, in the kingdom known as Thomond. Cinnéide, then King of Thomond, gave his name to the Ó Cinnéide, or in English, the Kennedy clan. The Kennedy name did, of course, spread to different areas of the country. Today you'll find Kennedys in all parts of the country, but mainly in the south. But like most Irish families with strong roots associated with one place, the Kennedys are still to be found in greatest numbers in Tipperary. Hurling, Ireland's national sport, is reminiscent of the time when the great clans of Ireland battled for land power and the high kingship.
It was the strength of Christianity that forged the first real bonds of unity in Ireland. For the Irish took very well to Christianity, so well indeed that in a very short time her monks had established some of the most important ecclesiastical centres in the Christian world.
Here in Glendalough, in County Wicklow, I always think the sense of Ireland's Christian past is particularly strong. There had been small settlements of monks scattered along the Irish coast for some time, but it took St. Patrick to bring together the old religion of the Celts and the new Christianity. This new Irish Christianity turned out to be a powerful crusading force.
With the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe was once more plunged into the Dark Ages. And strangely enough, that's what gave us, I think, our first emigrants, the young Irish monks who left their Irish monasteries and brought the flame of Christianity back into that pagan continent.
At home in Ireland, the monks built the unique round towers, originally as bell towers, and then later used them for keeping safe their priceless chalices and manuscripts. In their workrooms, the monks channeled their passionate Celtic sensitivity into glowing colour and intricate artwork. And certainly, the greatest and most beautiful of the manuscripts is the Book of Kells, now in the library of Trinity College, Dublin. The work of the monasteries, however, was to be disturbed by the arrival of the Vikings. For 200 years, they came as pirates to plunder gold from the great Irish monasteries. However, in 1014, they were finally defeated in battle by the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, after which they became fully integrated into Irish society. The Vikings built Ireland's first towns and cities, including Dublin, Wexford, Cork, and Limerick, and their commercial ability is reflected today in Dublin's famous Moore Street Market. The Vikings left an indelible impression on the Irish, and with their demise as a great power, coupled with the death of Brian Boru, meant in fact that the High Kingship of Ireland was up for grabs. What followed was almost a century of political instability and unrest, in which the greater Irish families fought amongst themselves for the title of High King of Ireland. It was an eventful century for the O'Kennedy clan. You see, they were situated right next door to the warlike O'Briens, and in the turmoil that followed, they were forced for their own safety to flee eastwards into North Tipperary, where they found that safety and friendship. But 100 years of shifting allegiances and bitter infighting left not only your ancestors, but the country as a whole unprepared for the next wave of newcomers to disembark on Irish soil. The Normans, led by the great warrior Strongbow, arrived in 1169. Heavily protected by their coats of mail, they moved like modern tanks through the Irish countryside. They had arrived as mercenaries at the request of the deposed King of Leinster, but a combination of their military might and an attraction to the land of your ancestors induced them to make a more permanent foothold. 10 years before the Norman arrival in 1169, the chief of the Kennedy family is described in the annals of the Four Masters as Lord of Ormond. 30 years later, the situation changed drastically when King John of England granted the Kennedy lands to a Norman family called Butler. Exhausted by war, the Kennedys made formal submission to the king and to the new Butler, Earl of Ormond. Despite this submission, the Kennedys maintained their old way of life and their old Celtic laws.
The arrival of the Normans was to have a profound effect on the fortunes of the O'Kennedy family. You see, the might of the invaders, coupled with the fact that the O'Kennedys at that time had their hands full with local warfare, would seem to indicate that the O'Kennedys might succumb. In the event, they did not. They were tough, resourceful, and quick to learn, and soon they were to earn the respect of the Norman settlers. Now, the Normans, as you know, were adept at throwing up magnificent stone castles everywhere. So the O'Kennedys, too, thought they'd try their hand at it, with great success, as you can see, because behind me here is Lorcáin Castle in North Tipperary, for long the home of the O'Kennedys.
Following his victories in battle, Strongbow took the hand of the King of Leinster's daughter, Eva, in marriage, and less than 2 years later, he had taken the crown for himself.
Stony towers are not always protective, for here in Waterford, at Reginald's Tower, the marriage of Strongbow and Eva started a trend that would eventually undermine Norman influence in Ireland. You see, within a century, the Normans and the Irish intermarried, and the Normans adopted the Irish language and culture to a degree that made the English king, John, declare, "The Normans are more Irish than the Irish themselves."
What followed then, although not always peaceful, was the coming together of the Norman and the Gaelic traditions, exemplified by the building of so many fine abbeys and monasteries which dot the landscape. In an attempt to regain their old power, Slive O'Kennedy married Donncuan O'Brien, thus forming an alliance with one of the most powerful families in Ireland. Armed with this alliance, the O'Kennedys were more than a match for the Butlers, so much so that in 1336 they are described as a nation of importance in a Butler document. After years of conflict with the Butlers, Brian O'Kennedy, the clan chieftain, was assassinated, and strangely enough, the assassination of Brian brought with it a truce. The Kennedys knew they would never again be the unchallenged lords of Ormond, so during the 15th century they began to extend their influence in a number of very clever ways.
A great symbol of those changing times can be seen here in this magnificent castle at Nenagh. Built by the Butlers, they lost it to the Kennedys, then they retook it again from the Kennedys, and back and forth it went for quite some time. Now this happened initially through combat, warfare, but eventually it was to happen through marriage and the alliances that naturally followed. And once again, the shrewd O'Kennedy clan were able to hold on to their lands.
Here at Bunratty Castle, the vibrant atmosphere of that period can be experienced in a banquet that is faithfully recreated using historical records from the time.
My noble lords and ladies, my noble guests, the entry of your host this evening, the Earl of Thomond, Mr. Joe Lynch.
Food and drink in the old style, music and song. This is how your ancestors entertained their friends.
This castle now awakes. Its ancient glory stirs. The clink of mail and laughter fills its halls, and we inherit all its chivalry. Bunratty bids you welcome. A toast to all you hear. Sliger is sail.
Let the banquet begin.
After the assassination of Chieftain Brian O'Kennedy, His heir, Edmund O'Kennedy, died before he could inherit the title. The Kennedys at this time wisely made themselves indispensable. One branch became councillors to the mighty O'Neills of Ulster, while another became sheriffs of County Dublin. The Kennedys, however, were not safe from the ravages of the time. In the 15th century, the plague claimed many of them, including Mary O'Kennedy, the daughter of James, who, according to the annals, died with her daughter in 1464, a victim of the Black Death. Kennedys appear frequently in the records of the time. For instance, in the calendar of ancient records of Dublin for the 16th century, we discovered an interesting sequence of events centred around a George Kennedy. In the spring of 1590, he was elected Sheriff of Dublin, but 6 months later, he was fined for disappearing to England, thereby reneging on his duties. However, the sum was substantially reduced following his humble submission to the Dublin Assembly. Kennedys always valued courage over pragmatism and could not belittle themselves to save their skins. One of the many Kennedys to forfeit his life was Daniel Kennedy. In 1657, an English officer was awarded £20 for putting Daniel's head over the gate of Carlow Castle as a warning to those who chose nobility over servility. Several Kennedys later fought at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. Unfortunately, they chose the losing side. Consequently, 17 Kennedy families were outlawed and lost their lands. During the 1500s, the power of the Celtic chieftains began to wane under sustained military pressure from the forces of the English crown. This, in turn, led to a series of rebellions. The last great Celtic revolt ended here at Kinsale in 1601. It had been led by the mighty Hugh O'Neill of Tyrone. In the year 1609, O'Neill and many of the other Irish chieftains left our shores. This was called the Flight of the Earls. It heralded the end of the old Celtic ways. Now it was a new Ireland, new kings, new centres of power. The Flight of the Earls is a testament to the concept of Ireland as an independent nation, the Celtic aristocracy choosing exile rather than submission. To consolidate their power in Ireland, the new rulers sent out clerks to record the names of Ireland. Unable to speak the Irish language, these clerks did not attempt to properly translate the indigenous names, but rather made approximate and phonetic translations. As you travel through Ireland today, you will notice how the signposts carry evidence of that name-changing process which began so long ago. For example, Báile an Mhuircheig, meaning the town of the Murphys, became Ballymurphy. Castlán I Chonaill simply became Castle Connell. About this time, your name began to take on its present form. At the hands of the English-speaking clerks, the old name of Ó Cinnéide became O'Kennedy. Eventually, in some cases, the O was dropped, and in many cases, the spelling was the best approximation the English clerks could make to the sound of this ancient and royal Irish name. The essential Irish culture, however, remains strong and vibrant, and despite continued assault, it has remained so to this day. The Irish have always been proud of their heritage and culture, and nowhere is this more evident than in the art of heraldry. And here to tell you more about that is the former Chief Herald of Ireland, Gerard Slevin.
Heraldry had its origin in the fact that the knight in medieval times, going into warfare, was completely encased in armour, including his head. So there was no means of knowing who he was. So it became the practice to paint on his shield certain emblems or signs or symbols as a means of identification. heraldry has always had an extraordinary fascination for people, whatever it is about the shield shape and its contents. And in due course, this personal practice spread to cities, universities, institutions, and is still very active. The primary purpose, as I have suggested, was identification. And I suppose that is still the essential purpose of heraldry, is personal or institutional identification.
Your coat of arms is a window to your heritage. Each part is full of stories and secrets. The shield displays 3 helmets on a black background. The helmet, in the language of heraldry, denotes a family who have displayed wisdom and security in defence. It could also refer to one of the meanings of the Irish form of your name, Ó Cinnéide, the helmeted one. The crest, which is placed above the shield, shows an arm dressed in blue, a scimitar clutched in its hand. The scimitar is an unusual symbol. The sword proper is a symbol of justice and strength, a true symbol of military honour. The scimitar could well suggest that the family were defenders of the Christian faith and attended the Crusades in the Holy Land. The motto, too, captures so much of the spirit of your family. It is in Irish and reads, Lov loidir an uachtar, meaning the strong hand uppermost.
Many Irish people certainly are entitled to use arms, yes. The registers of the office of arms, the genealogical office as it is now, the office of the Chief Herald, has registers going back many centuries.
The 17th century saw England convulsed by 2 civil wars in which Ireland inevitably became involved. The Second War was actually fought entirely on Irish soil between 1688 and 1691 and led to disastrous consequences for the Irish. 1691 saw the ending of the Williamite Wars with the signing of the Treaty of Limerick, signed on this very stone. The wars are fought between 2 kings, William of Orange and James II, both of whom laid claim to the throne of England. In the event, victory went to King William. For the Irish who supported James II, exile seemed to be the only honourable option. Known to history as the Wild Geese, these honourable soldiers of fortune sailed from Limerick to Europe, bringing with them the surnames of Ireland.
The O'Kennedys always resisted the invader, whether that was the forces of Queen Elizabeth I or later on the armies of Cromwell. And for this, they were made to suffer grievously. Their lands were confiscated, they were banished to Connacht, and many others of them were scattered throughout Ireland in a deliberate attempt to break the power of the Kennedy family ties. Alas, the Kennedys were kings no more. And so it was that they were among the first of the many Irish families who left our shores to seek a better life in the new world.
Great numbers of the Kennedy clan were among the wild geese who fled to France and Spain. Matthew Kennedy settled in Paris and became a notable literary figure, while Thomas Kennedy became part of the Belgian nobility. Others who went to Spain leave descendants who today bear the name Cennétig. Although Catholic, the O'Kennedys in Ireland were not entirely defeated. In 1705, they were amongst the chosen few to whom the English Lord Lieutenant granted permission to carry arms, and in 1878, 19 of them were listed as landowners of note. From the days of the early Christian missionaries to the present day, emigration has been an integral part of the history of the Irish people. From this small nation, millions of Irish people have traveled the world over to Europe, Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Australasia. Although many left in search of adventure or to find their fortunes, many others didn't have the choice. In the aftermath of the wild geese, which had seen the best and brightest of their day depart, Ireland was to undergo many changes, the most dramatic of which was the massive transfer of land ownership.
As the land changed, so too did the politics. In 1801, the Irish Parliament in Dublin was dissolved. And as the last vestiges of power dwindled, so too did the wealth of the country, and the land sank into poverty. In 1845, a blight arrived. The potato, the staple diet of the Irish people, was totally destroyed. So began the Great Irish Famine. And so too began the greatest migration of the Irish people.
Plentiful supplies of foodstuffs were exported to Britain, while the Irish people were faced with emigration in order to survive. A letter written in 1847 captures the sense of devastation. It is early morning as I write this last note before departing. We now join a huge army forced to leave their native land. The heavy morning mist is a fitting curtain for the final scene, the climax of all our strivings against impossible odds. I cannot help but glance back through the pages of our history to the years when Ireland was a beacon of learning and faith whose light spread to all parts of Europe. God grant that those days of glory may someday return. Irish people emigrated in their hundreds of thousands. They set sail from Cove, Liverpool and Belfast. Cramped together on overcrowded ships, rife with hunger and disease, they arrived in Montreal, New York and Boston. In Australia, famine refugees followed those who had been transported there as convicts. Many of these convicts had been expelled from their home country on charges such as stealing bread, others for belonging to revolutionary organizations. Despite their impoverished beginnings, the contribution made by those emigrants to their new countries was enormous. In the building of the modern world, from the late 17th century right up to the present day, the Irish have played a vital part in whatever society or culture they have settled in. Today, people of Irish descent number in excess of 70 million worldwide. In Irish history, the name of Kennedy holds a distinguished place. Hugh Kennedy, the brilliant lawyer and first Chief Justice of the Irish Free State. The 19th century authors Patrick Kennedy and Patrick John Kennedy, the latter a well-known Irish-American Catholic publisher. The list of distinguished Kennedys is constantly growing. As a Kennedy, you will want to visit Tipperary and County Clare. But above all, you must visit County Wexford. Here near New Ross, almost 800 acres of beautiful Irish parkland have been laid aside as a tribute to the memory of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. This beautiful arboretum has 4,500 varieties of different trees and shrubs drawn from all over the world. A great tribute to the man. And that certainly makes you proud to be a Kennedy. From the earliest days of Irish history, the great name of Kennedy has been at the forefront of Irish life. Those Kennedys who chose exile and emigration brought their tradition of courage and wisdom to their new homes. Across the world, the name Kennedy is borne with pride.